Animated films, especially 3D animated films, are hard to make and cost a lot of money. Disney's Frozen cost $150 million. Pixar's Brave cost $185 million. DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon 2 cost $145 million. And Food Fight cost $60 million. Imagine that. $16 million to make this. Except, this isn't the $60 million film. This is a $60 million film. Food Fight had a squash and stretch style of animation before all of its files were stolen. The film that came out a decade later was not the $60 million film. Its budget was much smaller as it was based off insurance, and ultimately taken from the producers by the production bond company, and released with what it had completed. Animated films are hard and cost a lot, except Food Fight provides a unique opportunity to show what one needs to succeed, and a way to make animated films for a lot less, potentially opening up animated films to indie studios. Note, I am not concerned with the story of Food Fight. It is a bad story, but stories are free to write. A good story can save a poorly made film, so it isn't necessary to say the film should have a good story. This video is more concerned with the visual aspect of animated films, and lessons one can learn from the behind the scenes of animated productions, and how they work within limitations. The first important note for any indie animation studio: animation is worth more than anything else. The textures, the model quality, the music, the backgrounds, all of these are worth less than the animation. If you, as a producer, have the choice between better animation or better textures, go with animation. Otherwise, you get Food Fight's stiff and lifeless animation, and characters that don't even move their eyes. Animation is the one thing you are not allowed to skimp on. The sole exception being if putting more effort towards the models in turn makes the animation easier and faster. However, there are several ways to reduce the amount of time necessary to animate the characters, and ways to save time on the things people won't be focusing on. Look at this shot from Food Fight. It appears to be missing something, doesn't it? What is missing is the background. There are some buildings and a sky, but that isn't everything a background needs. This is supposed to be a city, so where are all the people? This is a part of the mise en scène, everything in the scene. Animated films have total control over what appears in the frame, and it must be utilized. The scene here isn't supposed to feel empty, but it does because there isn't anyone walking in the background. There is a reason why the producers didn't put in people. They would take time to animate, and they would require time to render. Both are things an indie filmmaker doesn't have the time or resources for, but are necessary. How does one get around this? Have you ever looked at the people in the background in the Topsy-Turvy Day sequence of Hunchback of Notre Dame? Those people are simple 3D models on a simple animation loop. Pretty creepy, but they were effective. They gave the appearance of an active background without a massive amount of effort or resources. For another example, there is the 1000 Heartless fight in Kingdom Hearts 2. It was impossible for them to render 1000 Heartless on screen at the same time, so they made the Heartless not nearby Sora, the main character, into an animated GIF. Crowds are a problem for 3D animation as well. Early in A Bug's Life's life cycle, they were having problems rendering more than 12 models in a scene at once, so they made a workaround and turned models into cardboard cutouts. There are two tricks to draw from this to shorten animation time and rendering time. Utilize canned animations and cardboard figures in the background. With canned animations, only one period of time is used to animate a repeated motion. Examples include idle animations like breathing, walking, falling. Yeah, avoid this too. It just looks ridiculous. For background characters, you usually only need animations of them walking, standing, or performing whatever job they're supposed to do. Then you can turn that animation into a flat GIF on a box and save a lot of time animating background actions. Following that, we should discuss model construction. One way to save time in rendering is to follow the example of video games and have a maximum polygon and bone count for characters. Only enough polygons and bones to do what is necessary for them all to do, no more. However, animation and making sure it looks good takes precedent. For instance, when it comes to skirts, dresses, and other forms of drapery, they cannot be attached directly to the model. When they are, they stretch to accommodate the legs or clip into them. They must be separate in order to maintain their size and flow. Unless the drapery is explicitly made of super stretchy rubber, it must be animated as its own separate model. Or you could just save time and not deal with drapery. Or water. Liquids are hard to create and work with in animation. Part of it is particles, which require a lot of animation and rendering time. And being lazy with them creates this. If something doesn't look good, find a workaround. My personal suggestion? Instead of working with particles, utilize some stylized 2D animation. 2D animation takes a bit, but it takes a lot less time than particles and is easier to make look good. Mind you, it has to match with the world, but that brings us to our next point. Good textures and models do not match with lower-end animation. Dex Dog Detective from Food Fight has some pretty decent textures on his model, and is really out of place because he is so stiff. Most kinds of textures wouldn't fit with such stiff animations, mind you, but putting that much work into the model itself and skimping on the animation is the opposite of what I said before. Animation and texture styles must match. For instance, the recently released Book of Life has characters modeled and textured to be like wooden puppets, which allows for simplified animation. It also only cost $50 million, a third of Frozen's budget. As an aside, there should be a uniform animation style in your film. Of course, this allows characters to appear plausible, but also makes animation easier when they all utilize the same style. This isn't a problem with just film animation, however. TV shows, like the newly released Sonic Boom, also make the mistake of trying to look good instead of moving well. Good textures are nice, but the focus should be on movement, unless one is making a comic book. A good example for model construction has come up recently, in the newly announced Blizzard game, Overwatch. They have two models for the same characters, a cinematic one and an in-game one. The cinematic model obviously has higher quality, and likely has a lot more polygons and bones behind it. However, the in-game one is also pretty good, and it has its own fitting style. The in-game model could plausibly be used in animated film. In addition, the in-game model uses fewer polygons so it can render on the fly during gameplay. In short, while this may look great, this looks good and is functional. An indie animator should aim for this, and leave this to those with enough computers to render it within a year. There aren't that many indie animated films. The reason for this is because animated films take a lot of time, money, and work to create. But it is possible. Ever hear of Hoodwinked? It's a 2005 film that combines Rashomon with Red Riding Hood. It cost fewer than $8 million to make, which is the cheapest out of all computer animated films, not including the straight-to-DVD Brazilian stuff. It was also successful, grossing $110 million worldwide. How did they achieve this? Hoodwinked used simple models, simple textures, and simple animation. It also had a decent story and a consistent style throughout. It was cohesive, clean, and knew what it needed to do. It also helped that they utilized a helpful money-saving measure, just having people talk. Conversation is the universal money saver. If you can entertain an audience with two people talking at one location for over an hour, it can print money. Rashomon and Hoodwinked both focus more on dialogue than action. What makes Hoodwinked better than Food Fight besides its story? First of all, though the animation isn't nearly as good as Disney's Frozen, it is leagues beyond Food Fight. Part of the reason is the coherent style, but primarily it is because the characters are very expressive. They aren't restrained in their movements like in Food Fight. Secondly, they have decent textures befitting the level of animation. They didn't put all their efforts into making them look good in still shots, they put it into their movement. Thirdly, the film makes full use of its mise en scène. Nothing looks empty. The background is fitting for each shot. They didn't overextend themselves in the department and subsequently have to cut back on the most expensive part, the animation. The models and animation may not be impressive, but they don't have to be. They just have to work well. It is entirely possible to make an indie animated film. One just needs a good story, know what they need to do to make it work, and know their limits. If the most one can get for a budget is $4 million, don't worry about making the models or the world look fantastic. Worry about making them move well, as that is the number one thing people will focus on. You can skimp on everything, but not the animation.